are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Dale McGleenon, who is the Senior Manager for Incident Response at Deloitte. Thanks very much for joining us today. How are you?
You're welcome, David. Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Just trying to deal with the latest heat wave in the UK, which we're not very used to.
Yeah, I hear you. The weather is going crazy, and we had to work around your schedule because you're very busy, as well as your little Frenchie's schedule. He said he's always busy. He's got his calendar full, and hopefully he's going to have some time to join us to the show today.
He will indeed. He's currently trying to hide in the shade downstairs to get away from the heat, but he's definitely more famous than I am, to be fair.
Definitely, he's he's quite a LinkedIn celebrity for sure. So I wanted to ask you. You have a tremendous background. You spent quite some time as an officer in the Air Force, right? You were as part of the police force there. Maybe walk me through, you've spent, and I'm saying like what's the total amount? 20 plus years.
22 years. Yeah, did a full 22 years in the Royal Air Force Police.
So walk me how you got started, and how you got to be at the Air Force, and then you've fulfilled various different roles within the Air Force, and then you start working. Well, let's start with that. Let's start with kind of the Air Force, the early days.
Yeah, no worries. So I think it was from a young age. I actually wanted to join the police, civilian police, but at the time, I was too young for that. So I initially wanted to actually join the army, but my dad, thankfully, talked me out of that at the time, and he told me that I probably wouldn't have done very well in the army because they did a lot of shouting at you and made you run large distances with big heavy packs on. So he actually talked me out of it, and that was when I sort of decided that I'd join the Air Force. It was quite difficult actually because I'm originally from Northern Ireland, and obviously the Northern Ireland comes with its own troubles, and being a Catholic from Northern Ireland even more so, that joining the Royal Air Force was probably not the career choice that a lot of people would have seen for me. So it was always nice that my parents supported me in that, because my dad, actually being a Catholic from Northern Ireland as well, it was probably not what he saw for me, but he never said that to me. He always supported me in it. So I joined up at 18.
And Dale, just and this is super fascinating, and I want to double click on that. I reside in the U.S., and we're very U.S. centric.
Yeah.
So what you just described carries a lot of weight, but especially for people from that region to understand that. So if you don't mind, just give us a quick rundown. Why does it matter? What is a Catholic from Northern Ireland has issues with joining the police, and just give us a primer in that. It would be
no worries.
Helpful.
So Northern Ireland is basically there's two religious groups in Northern Ireland. There's Roman Catholics and there's Protestants. And Protestants, they tend to be what are called unionists, in that they want to remain part of the United Kingdom as a whole, because Catholics, a lot of them tend to be nationalists or Republicans, and it tends to be that they want a united Ireland, because the history goes far, far way further back than any of us can remember. But it's to do with the fact that Ireland used to be a whole entity, and at some point it became two different countries, one owned by or governed by the United Kingdom. So that's sort of what you grow up with that sort of mentality of you're one or the other, and you either hate the British and you love the Irish, or you're one of the people who wants to be considered British. So I was quite fortunate because my parents, my dad is Northern Irish and my mum's English, so I actually spent some of my youth growing up in England. So I sort of got to see it from both sides, and considered myself to be both, basically the best of both. But it was always strange when we moved back to Northern Ireland to be told to, without swearing, go back to your own country. And considering it was my country, it was always a little bit striking that I was being told to do that just because I had an English accent. So I sort of grew up seeing both sides of it, and that was why I never really had any bother joining the forces. I always thought, it was, especially as a young single lad, it was a way to get out, see the world, experience different things, and then come back and join the civilian police like I'd always planned to do. But obviously things took a different track. And I always remember when I first joined up, I was told by all the old crusties, that they'd all said this when they joined up. They said they were going to do a couple of years, get out and join the police, and then they said, you'll be here in 20 years from now, the same person. And I was always like, no, I'll definitely be a civil policeman. And then I turned into one of those old crusty blokes saying, yeah, you're probably going to end up here at some point.
So this is super interesting. Thanks for giving us the kind of the primer around that, again, for being US centric and North America centric. A lot of people are not aware. So, and it's really interesting as well that I think that what you've done, paves the way, I think, for eventually for things to, to come together. And because we see that the kind of the conflict everywhere around the world. There's always these different sides of, and I think that, fast forward maybe 100 years from now, because we're, as you mentioned, you're a mix of Irish and English. I think we're all going to be a mix of some sorts, and then eventually, hopefully, that kind of all the silos of religious and political, sides are going to come down, and we'll be, be as one. So, tell me a bit about the Air Force. When you joined the Air Force, do you remember the kind of the early days of the kind of the selection process? Again, it's not, people kind of glanced over it, but the whole process of joining requires some heavy lifting on your part, right? It's not a simple process. Do you still remember those early days?
I don't think I'll ever forget them. They were very. It's very different to civilian life in that immediately they're trying to not beat's the wrong word, but they're trying to get the civilian out of you and instill the military ethos and
very quickly.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it. My basic training, I think it was 7 weeks for basic training before going on to police training, and in that time, you join as this person who's used to getting up at whenever they wanted and doing their own thing and having parents who did your laundry for you and made your meals and stuff like that. And you go from that to a completely different way of life and way of thinking and everything, literally down to they showed you how to shower and wash, and an instructor actually came in and showed you how to iron a shirt, and these are all things that you don't even think about as a civilian. So it was very much shock and awe, I think, and I remember a couple of times being homesick and on the phone to my parents and saying, I'm coming home. I don't want to do this. And my dad, obviously a big influence in my life. He was the one who sort of chatted to me and made me just see out the time and then see what you think, and because of that I obviously cracked on it and stayed. And
Dale, do you have a choice? Like, do they give you is there a way for you to basically like you sometimes you see in the movies where during basic training or otherwise you have the ability to basically say go out, touch a pole and say I quit? Is that the case there too?
Yeah, it was. I think it's at the 4 week point or 4.5 week point. You get you basically, if you want to quit, that's when you can quit. You can't quit until that point, which is a good thing because it means that people can get through those bouts of homesickness and get into the real part of it before making a decision. So yeah, in the Air Force, that's the way it was, and I believe it's the same across the different arms of the forces. That you get that you have to remain at that point, but after that, once you've signed on the dotted line, that's you're in and you don't get out then until I think the first point you can get after that is like the 4-year point.
And then do you remember the kind of after this training, people that are not going through it, they don't realize how much training you actually get in a very, very short amount of time. Do you remember like the first few weeks, few months after basic training, they throw you into this gauntlet of training, and again, it's not 9 to 5. This massive amount of. Maybe you can walk me through what you've done in the first couple of years.
Yeah, so after basic training, it was. I remember my first unit, and the RAF Police back when I joined to the RAF Police when I left was very different. The job was very different as well, because when I first joined up, I think you were a policeman, but you were also a security guard basically, and you did a lot of static. Vehicle checkpoint duties and checking IDs and barrier. We were called barrier guardians, and because we barrier up, barrier down sort of thing. So we didn't do anything that was too difficult, to be honest. But on the flip side, you also were in the military, so you had to, my first few years, I went to Kuwait as my first operational tour, and I did the Falklands, I did Iraq, and these were all, completely different, because it was out there. You were doing stuff like, patrols around the perimeter of the unit and stuff. Nothing compared to what the army do. I never put myself in even the same bracket as what they were doing out in the likes of Iraq and Afghanistan. But we were still, that first point of protection at the front of the base, where if anything, you were stood there, not able to move, and you were just sort of waiting for something to happen. So they were sort of really scary times, but my first unit was night and day to that. I was doing container checks. So, you were walking around big buildings in the middle of the night, checking that containers have been secured. And, if anyone tells you that they don't get scared walking around a building that's, from pre-World War One, where there's stories going around about all sorts of ghosts and stuff, and you're walking around this building with a pistol strapped to your side. If anyone tells you they're not walking around with their hand on their pistol waiting for something to jump out at you, but the amount of times I heard noises in those buildings and was like, no, that's it, I'm done, I'm off. Which made it was worse, because back then we used to play tricks on each other, and whenever the new person arrived, you'd have people dressing up in flight suits with helmets on, just when they go to turn a light on, grabbing their hand. How no one ever got
No way, Dale. You got to tell me what the reaction was. So that was the kind of the initiation, tricks that you guys pulled off. So,
yeah,
somebody can get a heart attack,
exactly.
from
Well, how no one ever got shot, I've no idea. But yeah, it's there was things like that used to go on all the time, and it's the typical thing of in the police, especially when you deal with some of the things that you deal with in that job. It's the humour and the banter and the dark humour and stuff that does get you through certain situations. And it's one of those things that's very difficult to shake when you move from the military into civilian life, because you'll say something and immediately there'll be a reaction that you'll go, oh wait, I probably shouldn't have said that. So it's quite difficult to tone that down once you leave.
Yeah, and Dale will definitely talk about that, because there's a lot of implications associated with spending so many years with the forces, that it basically creates a certain individual attributes that are not so well, received in the civilian life. So we'll talk a bit about that. So that's super interesting. Now, you spend a lot of time in kind of the physical security side. At what point was there a transition to doing other types of work?
So I don't think there was ever a transition for me. I was a typical geek, geek child. When everyone was out playing football, I was inside, working out how things worked. I was taking things apart. Christmas presents and stuff, I'd take them apart and work out what was going on. My parents hated it, because I may have been able to take things apart, but putting them back together again wasn't such a great skill. So sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But it was one of those things. My mind was always racing. I was always wanting to know what was what and how things were working. And then computers arrived around the time I was 9 or 10. They started to become something that you could actually, buy and use. And my very first one was an Amstrad 464. So the old tape deck with the thing, and you could play games. And then I wanted to know how that was working. How was the code working to make that work? And so I very much was always a geek. When I joined up, there was no real, for the police, there was no real, job that you could do that you could use those skills. So in the end, it was actually pure luck that I landed in the role that I landed in towards the end of my career, which was as an incident responder in the MOD's sort of main SOC. And it was a double-edged sword, because it was my dream job. I always thought what my dream job would be, but obviously part of that job turned out to be the thing that reshaped sort of the rest of my life after leaving. So I think that I was always destined to arrive in that sort of job, but I took a bit of a detour before leaving, which has sort of shaped who I am now and why I talk about some of the things I talk about so passionately.
Yeah, and there's certain skill set that you've acquired through the years in the Air Force that are very much applicable to incident response.
I think being a policeman, it's a mentality of questioning things. You want to know what happened, and you want to follow the evidence to sort of show you what happened. And the police in our trade who move into that sort of role, they do very well just because of that sort of mentality, because that's the first question any client wants to know, right? Is how did it happen? Did we lose anything? And how do we stop it from happening again? And those are sort of the three main questions that you want to be able to answer for them. And to be able to answer those questions can sometimes be difficult, because the people that we're tracking, the people that we're investigating, they're not stupid. They're very good at what they do. They're very good at trying to hide their tracks, but we just need to be better at finding the evidence, right? So I think that policemen and people with that sort of mentality, not just policemen, but an investigative, nosy sort of, I want to know, they do well because they don't just stop. And when they get the answer, they maybe go a bit further and find out how and why.
One more thing that I think is similar is you mentioned through the conversation that there's a lot of, nothing happens in the forces, and all of a sudden there's something. So you go from hours of hours, and I think there's something to be said about incident response, because, and you can tell me if there's similarities there, where like you look at stuff over and over again and there's nothing, and all of a sudden you see a glimpse of a threat, you start to pull off, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, this massive amount of things that you can review. Is that true?
I would say that that's completely correct. It's because a lot of it is hiding in plain sight as well. Once an adversary gets through that perimeter and gets onto your landscape, they become a normal user. They're using tools that are on the network. They're using accounts that are on the network, and that's where it becomes very difficult. To be able to know where to look and how to look for it. But a lot of it is, you're waiting for things to happen. A lot of it is the reactive stuff. And I think it's trying to bridge that gap between reactive and proactive. And we're doing better these days with the likes of like threat hunts, being able to sort of, when you're not investigating something, you're hunting for them to see if they're on there. But I think it's a lot of it is sitting waiting. And then when it happens, it's the expertise of knowing what you're looking for and where to look.
And also, as a police officer, you become almost an expert in human nature as well. I think that because you always question, it's like, trust but verify. And you always question the folks that you meet. And in your career, how many people do you think you've talked to and questioned throughout those 20 plus years?
In the case of suspects, I'm probably talking hundreds. But even people that you're not investigating, you're looking at their body language. You're looking to see what their eyes are doing, and when you ask them a question, you're looking for those little triggers of, he's looking a bit uncomfortable, or what's he's looking up to the right. That means he's trying to think of something to say. It's all these little things that you learn over the years. But I think that's true of anyone in general who has that sort of inquisitive nature. My wife, God bless her, she puts up with a lot with me, and one of the things that she's mentioned a few times is when we go into like restaurants, I always have to sit looking at the door. I always have to be able to see what's going on, and I'll be listening to a talk, but I'm actually looking at everything that's going on around us, and then she'll be like, ask me questions about, and I'll be able to answer it, and it really infuriates her at times because I'm clearly not giving her my full attention. But that's just the person I am now, and I think some of that is obviously to do with my issues as well, is that I'm very, very unnerved in certain situations, so I just need to see what's going on, which she understands is the reason for that now.
Yeah, old habits die hard.
Exactly.
So do you remember the kind of the first, couple months in the civilian workforce? As you mentioned, you kind of landed, a gig, to say that, as incident responder. You remember what was the training like and how you transitioned? And I've talked to a lot of veterans, and all of them have some difficulties associated with the fact that they as you mentioned, it's very structured, and moving from that structure to all of a sudden, doing what you expected to do, but there's no clear lines. That makes it very difficult sometimes for the transition.
So I probably need to touch on why I left before moving into that, and obviously people who follow my LinkedIn and stuff, they know the story. But my time at my last unit doing that job, so some of that job entailed investigating the criminal web browsing sessions that people conducted on the network, and that would obviously cover content that was really quite distasteful and horrific, from child pornography to other really unmentionable stuff. And that was 6 years of my life doing that job, and there was no sort of support or therapy in place during that time. So unsurprisingly, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and that was my reason for leaving. Was I was medically discharged in the end from the Air Force, but luckily I'd done my full career by that point. So I was in a place in my life where I didn't think I had a future, and I was very much in a dark place with regards to future careers. I'm very fortunate in the fact that a colleague of mine from that time, Martin Hyde, he was, in fact, Martin Hyde, he'll kill me for saying Hyde, but he was my sergeant at one point in that last unit, and he had left a few years previous and gone to work for Deloitte. So it was actually him that made me realize that I still had a future and a career that I could go into. So I joined Deloitte, and I was obviously very, very nervous about it, because being in public, going out, leaving the house, very difficult for me. Being around people and trusting people is obviously a massive issue for me. But in a way, COVID was a silver lining for me personally, just because it meant I joined Deloitte probably about 2 weeks before COVID hit. And I basically spent my first year and a half, 2 years working from home after that point. So for the transition for me was a bit easier than a lot of veterans would normally have. The downside to COVID was that I caught COVID, which I believe to be COVID now, because it was just before COVID became the cool thing that everyone was talking about. But it was actually my second interview for Deloitte with one of the partners. I went into London for, and I thought I was just really nervous. But when I got back home again off the train, Colleen took one look at me and took me straight to the hospital, straight to the doctors, and they called an ambulance, rushed me to another hospital, and that hospital said, "No, we can't deal with you. You're far too serious. You have to go to a different hospital with a doctor and a nurse." And I nearly died on the ambulance, which was is now my party trick, that I talk about at parties. But yeah, survived it and got the job. So thankfully, it didn't put me out of the running for my job there.
That is an incredible story. So talk to me about that party trick. What happened? Like, I'm intrigued now.
It was at the time it was very obviously scary, because I remember getting to the doctors and they start putting leads all over me and doing ECGs and the like, and then they called the ambulance straight away. And I remember being taken to Bath Hospital, which is the local hospital to us, and they put me straight up to the ward and started monitoring me and what have you. And they didn't know what was going on, to be fair. And they gave me some.
It was early days, right? Yeah, it was very early.
I mean, it was literally right at the beginning, because it was end of February 2020, or is it 1920? Dates I'm not very good with dates. But yeah, it was literally just before it sort of became big news. They started giving me medication and stuff, but that started to mess with my blood pressure and what have you. And I think they just got nervous in the end and said, we're going to send you to Bristol. So they threw me on an ambulance to Bristol with a doctor on board and then another nurse. And it was on the way to that hospital that my blood pressure took a tank down to, I think they said it was like 42. So I was basically like clinically almost there.
That's crazy. What's it like? Normally it's 140?
Something like that, yes. I think it was because they'd started giving me anti-nausea medication or something, and that obviously. So I remember the paramedic shouting very loudly at the doctor to turn it off, whatever that was. But yeah, they got me straight into Bristol, and the next thing I know, I'm on a table with doctors all around, putting they called it, I can't remember what they called it, but they put a cable all the way up my artery into my heart and started scanning it and stuff. So the good thing that came out of it was that I know I've got a good heart, so that's I know that's not the problem. But yeah, no, they then in the end said it was probably pneumonia, they thought at the time, but then since then, obviously, COVID became the cool thing to have, and I think that's probably what it was, but scary times.
So Dale, you know, our life is shaped with experiences that then shape to who we are, and then you know, change our views of things. And you've gone through a lot, you know, through the service to this incident to, you know, things that you've gone through in life. You know, how did it affect your view of things, and maybe personal and professional life?
I think for me, I used to be what would be classed as the cheeky chappy. You know, I was always the one that sent life and soul of the party, always center attention, trying to cheer everyone up. And I think from the outside in, most people would still see that person, because I wear a very good mask that I don't like to take off when I'm around people, because my wife's probably the only person who sees that side of me, and how she's still with me, I have no idea. She's a saint, but I don't like to remove that mask when I'm around people, because at the end of the day, it's already affected me and you know, people around me. I don't want it to affect everyone else. So it's changed my mindset on a lot of things. You know, like trust of humans is a big thing for me, because I've seen what humans can do now. You know, I generally don't like to talk about it, because I don't even like talking about it to therapists, because I almost see it as a continuation of the abuse and the like, and I worry about how it affects them. So I try to deal with that in a different way, but it's made me realize that as an employer and as a manager of people, you have to prioritize well-being very high up the list, because I'm an example of what happens when you don't do that. And it doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the people who live with them, the people who love them, the people that they love. So I am very outspoken within Deloitte. I'm very outspoken, but on my LinkedIn, I'm very outspoken about well-being. I'm also quite a big champion of child safety online, because I believe that is one thing that people are almost scared of. If you look at it a certain way, a lot of parents don't understand technology, and that's no slight to them. A lot of people don't understand technology, which I think is why it's something that we as professionals within that industry should be helping out with, because if we can educate and turn things into something less scary for them, they'll take more of an interest. They'll have a conversation with their children. They'll talk about these things, because I'm sure you were the same growing up. Back when we were growing up, it was stranger danger. Everyone knew about stranger danger. You know, they knew about never take sweeties from a stranger, never talk to strangers, don't get into cars with strangers. These were all things that were openly spoken about. Everyone knew it, and teachers would speak about it to children. These days, we still have stranger danger. You know, those people are still out there, but now there's that other risk of the person who pretends to be Johnny, age 10, who's talking to your kid and, you know, has 3 or 4 months to get to know them. And the first you know about it maybe is when Johnny, you know, your kid's not there in the morning and they've gone to meet Johnny. So these are dangers that I will talk about, because I think that these are the dangers that people need to know about. They don't need to know about why I'm so passionate about it, what I've had to look at, what I've had to deal with. They just need to know that those dangers are there. So it's one of the things that's definitely shaped who I am now compared to who I was. I think the cheeky chappy who I once was in my mind, it's sad to say, but that person's dead. You know, they no longer exist because of the things that I've dealt with and had to view. But this new person who is me now is luckily very much loved by his wife, and has obviously Leffe, who hopefully we'll meet in a very short while. I have those two in my life. You know, my wife I call my rock, And Leffe, I call my pebble because he's a smaller version of my rock, obviously. But without those two people in my life, and obviously close friends I have who supported me through it, and Deloitte, for the fact that they've supported me through a lot of what has happened, I think I'd be in a very different place.
And since this conversation is unscripted, I'm trying to, Dale, to keep track of all the things I'd like to ask you next, because everything you mentioned has, more questions that come up. So let me ask you this. We came a long way, I think, with treating PTSD, because, at one point in time, it was, it's like a pendulum, right? It was considered like a weakness. And in fact, I've watched documentaries where soldiers got shot in World War I, think, even World War II and we came a long way, but there's still a lot to do, right? So, and also the way you encounter it is slightly unique in the sense that, again, it's something that, maybe talk to me about, where are we with this whole, diagnosing and treating, and where do you feel that things need to go, or maybe things are perfect right now and we're doing the best we can. Just talk to me about, because you have the firsthand experience of, on that.
Yeah, so I think in the military at the time, I think things have improved since then, but in the military at the time, that's exactly what it was. It was anything mental was seen as weakness. It was seen as, you've got a twisted sock or, a broken nail, or that's how they classed this sort of thing. So you very much kept your head below the parapet. You didn't admit these things. You didn't admit weakness, and that the stigma attached to mental health in the military at the time was huge. And I think that has changed over the years because of Afghanistan, because of, Iraq and things like that. People have started to obviously, deal with PTSD. And because obviously back in World War I, World War II, it was shell shock and it was cowardice. That was what it was called. So things have moved with time. But there's always more to do, because I think that mental health is one of those things that we need to remove that stigma. Things like imposter syndrome and the like are very much relevant, especially in our industry, because people do put a lot of pressure on themselves without all the external pressures that come with it. But I think PTSD, it's different for each person, because you mentioned that, the veterans who have got it from conflict, and, I can't be put in the same room as them, because I can't do group sessions, therapy sessions, that sort of thing, because the things that I need to talk about are not something they need to hear, in the same way that I probably don't need to hear the things that they've gone through. I've been through. I met a charity, or got introduced to a charity called the Not Forgotten Association, who are a charity here in the UK, and before I met them, I see the introduction to them as a turnaround point for me in my life, because it was a Brands Hatch Day that I attended with them, and basically it was like a driver experience day. Lots of rich people brought their cars and give you a tour around Brands Hatch in it. I lasted one journey because I'm a terrible passenger and I nearly threw up. So I spent the rest of the day taking photos of cars and talking to people, but the next experience after that was actually I got invited to a garden party at Buckingham Palace, and I was stood there and I was talking to a Marine who had no legs, both his legs, double amputee, and he was on his prosthetic legs, and I remember just thinking, why am I here with these people? These people are heroes, they are genuine, bona fide heroes. Why am I stood in the same, breathing the same air as them? And he started talking to me, and I said this to him, and he was like, but you got to understand that your story to me, I'm thinking the same thing, because the things I dealt with when I discuss it, he's like, how do you get through that? How do you deal with that? How have you got the mental capacity to still be here? And it was that moment that I sort of thought, we're in the same positions. We're just, some of us have taken physical damage, others have taken mental damage, and even the physical damage leads to mental damage as well. I've actually met a couple of people who have had a big influence on my life. Johnny's one of them, who I met through Not Forgotten, and he's a double amputee as well. And we go to Bath Rugby together, us and our partners, because we're season ticket holders there. And you look at the stuff they've gone through, and it's that joint sort of knowledge that helps you to understand you can get through the next day, you can get through the next hour because they have, and you sort of all sort of bind together to do that. So I think that has definitely helped with my PTSD, and I think that it's the sort of thing that helps with others as well.
And it's so interesting that you didn't categorize yourself with the same category, and just because you don't show externally, you don't show it. Do you find that there's more awareness now than it ever used to be? And I know you're an advocate for that, for people that have gone through, and again, you can't see on the external side. And in fact, as you mentioned, you're probably a bit of an actor when you're in a crowd, right? You mentioned, and it's actually that's an interesting piece of it, because there's a lot of comedians that have gone through a lot of adversity, and they're great comedians, but on the inside, they actually have a very tragic story associated with some of their shows and so on. So that's the question. Like, do you find that there's more openness now for people in your position?
Yeah, I definitely think, like you mentioned, that comedian like Robin Williams obviously was quite a famous one that suffered with massive depression and anxiety, and I think it's very much the comedians that it's like the cheeky chappy that I was. It's about pleasing others, making sure that trying to help them not to fall into that trap of getting sucked into the darkness that it's so easy to happen. So I think that a lot of them do try to keep people out of that. But the awareness piece is definitely much better these days than it was. And a hidden disability like that is always going to be difficult, because people do look at you and they see, normality, whatever normality is in this day and age. They do see that. And that's why sort of one of the things that I always say is just be kind, because if you can't be kind, then just keep your mouth shut, because you don't know what any one person has gone through at a time in their lives. And why should we add to their issues? Because everyone has good days and bad days, or in my case, I call it good hours and bad days, because I don't class, time-wise. It's very much you take the wins when you can. But I think that we need to be more aware of other people and try to understand that everyone's not going to be at the top of the game all the time. Anything could be happening in that person's life. And we just need to be aware of it. And I'm more aware of when someone who we work with every day comes in and maybe they're a bit quieter than normal. Why is that? Maybe they just need a chat, or maybe they need more. But the awareness piece, I think, is much better now, because of COVID again. I think COVID is something that most people who maybe didn't understand anxiety, depression, that sort of thing before, they started to taste a bit of it during COVID. Because I, as a hermit who never left the house and likes my own company, even I, by the end of COVID, was wanting to get out and socialize a bit more. So I can only imagine that for normal people, it was probably 10 times worse. So I think that helps with the awareness piece for the majority of people.
And you're an advocate for well-being, and there's something to be said about burnout in cybersecurity. It seems like a lot of professionals are becoming disenchanted almost from the profession, and are going through, some of them are leaving in droves, and maybe switching roles or moving to different profession altogether. What's your take on that? Is just again from you have a unique perspective to see to see this from a different angle.
Yeah, I see it. I see it all around, because as cyber professionals, I think that we are our own worst enemies in the first instance. We want to be at the top of our game. We want to know everything, and we want to be able to react to every incident that comes in. So I work with, my team is filled with some really fantastic people, young, energetic, full of keenness, and they want to learn, they want to be the best. And as an old crusty, as I call myself, I'm the one that, I see us as being the parents at work, or grandparents in my case, as someone said to me at an event once, which didn't go down very well. But I almost see us as their braking system, and we have to put the brakes on for them and make sure that they get their downtime. And because if you don't, they will work themselves into the ground and think that that's okay. And that is never okay. I posted something on LinkedIn the other day about, because this is the thing about my LinkedIn posts. I don't sleep. I tend to nap when I need it. I don't like sleeping. Somnophobia, that's called, by the way. You can look it up. But I was lying in bed 3:00 in the morning, and it just came to me to do this post, and it was about the word no. And it is one of the very first, if not the first word that children learn when they're young, because they like to use it over and over again. But it's one of the hardest words to say in the working environment, because we think by saying no, someone's going to look badly on us and think that, we're not working as hard as we should. And I tried to change that, because when I came into the industry out of the MOD, I obviously had that mentality of never saying no. You always say yes. You do as you're told, and that's it. And so I was working at 130% of my capacity, day in, day out. And that was without dealing with an incident or, something that comes in ad hoc. So some very good advice I got from who was a senior manager at the time. He said, you want to work at 80% of the time to allow for when an incident comes in or when something comes in that you need to deal with that you don't expect. And I think that requires the ability to say no. We have a big team. The world is not going to stop turning because you've said no. Someone else will be able to pick that up. Someone else who's at less capacity can pick that up and do it. So you have to be your own, I think, warden on these things to be able to look after yourself first. And again, I think that is something that is becoming more prominent, but it's also something that probably gets a frown from certain business leaders or, people who have that old mentality, that old way of thinking that, you have to work until midnight and you have to, be doing things all the time. So it's one of those things that with the hybrid working approach, it can also run the risk of people being let through the holes. You may not notice them, but I think that in our team we do quite a good job of trying to keep a handle on it. But it's always a risk with regards to burnout, because it's just the way we are as professionals. We just want to be responding to every incident. We want to be helping. We want to be involved. So we almost have to be that bad parent that says, no, you've done enough now, go and play.
and isn't it hard sometimes, especially when you're working for an employer that has, billable hours and is working as a consultancy, and there are deadlines and projects and deliverables and customer facing. And typically, again, in your role, customers that you deal with are not in a good place sometimes. They're under a lot of stress. So how do you deal with all this? So again, from that one side, you have the well-being, but then on the other side, you have a lot of variables that are not necessarily conducive to what you just said, to taking it easy and working that 80%.
I think,
call it that.
Yeah, I think incidents have to be looked at in a slightly different way, because it is that client's worst day. You are there on their worst day. They're not thinking about anything apart from what's happened. This is bad. And as a consultancy, of course, you have utilization and the like to think about. But as an engagement manager, as a leader of people, we have to have that in the back of our minds that I don't like to call people resources, but that's what the business sees them as, right? So what is your most important resource? It's the person who's going to do the job for you. It's the person who has the expertise and knows what to do. If you break that person, you break that resource, then they're going to be out of the game for months, and what's the upside to that? There is no upside. So we have to be the people who consider that. We have to look at when we can swap people in and out, because that's what it's about. It's about the mentality of being able to do that and not having the mentality of the old times of that person works, 24 hours and gets dealt with. Incidents sometimes will take precedence, but I think that if you keep that in mind, once that incident's over, that's when you have to take that person into consideration and then give them the downtime to be able to get back to themselves, and don't throw them in straight into another incident. Most responders want to be involved in incidents, so it's not even a case of you're making them do something they don't want to do, but you have to have that perspective and the experience to know that once that incident's over, then you roll them out and you give them their time back to be able to decompress and move on to the next one.
And when you come in and have these engagement as a senior manager, I'm assuming that you kind of lead that team, and you come in and meet with the organization again, sometimes at the worst hours. Do you find that some of your background really helps you with that, provide that, calmness, and because you've been through a lot, so you have that kind of perspective that things can only, be better from here, and we're going to go through that hump as well. So talk to me about kind of the initial engagement when you are called in to, to deal with an incident. How does that look like? And how do you, again, kind of mobilize your team to basically provide that incident response is so critical to the customer and getting them back on their feet?
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part. My favorite part is the human side of it, the human side of the team, but also the human connection to the client, because the client may be a client of Deloitte, but it's not Deloitte they see, it's you as the human face. So that connection you've already built up with them over the time before of, just being in touch with them and being their relationship manager. That connection and that relationship is very important during that very stressful period for them, because you straight away you're arriving as they're looking at you to say you're gonna fix my problem. So they already start to feel more at ease when you're there, and I think that's where the communication comes in for me. Is that's my job. My job is to communicate with them, start to put them at ease, and explain to them what's going to happen. And at the same time, I'm also managing my team of people who are far smarter than I am. They know a lot more than I do about certain things, but that's their job, and I need to utilize them as that really specialized tool to start doing the job that I'm telling the client, we're doing. And it's almost like it's like that man in the middle. You're the man in the middle who explains to the client what's happening, explains to them what is going to happen, and also passes on that relevant information. But you're also steering the team behind you to be looking in the right places and get to that end goal as quickly as possible. So it's very much not a one person thing. I don't think of myself as any more important than anyone on the team, because without that team, I'm just a person who talks a lot, and that's not gonna solve anyone's worst day, is it? So it's very much the well-oiled machine that we go out, we do it, and then we report it and we move on, we learn from it, and we move on to the next one. And there's a lot of experience in the team that allows us to do that. But if you don't realize that you're only one piece in that machine, then that's when things start to go wrong, I think.
And with seniority comes more responsibility, right? And I'm assuming, again, it's not, all rosy. There's sometimes you have to go through some difficult conversations, with clients, depending on the outcome, depending on the current situation after you've gone through an assessment and so on. How do you deal with those?
I tend to make sure that the right people are in the room. I don't believe in trying to cuff things. I spent a career in the RAF of cuffing things, but that's a different world. So
do you use that line a lot? Because that's a very cool line. I'm going to have to trademark that one too.
Please, you take it, honestly. But it's true, it's fake it until you make it. A lot of people use that term a lot. And I'm not a big believer in that, because it's all too easy to be found out. So I think when you're going to have difficult discussions with clients, they're going to ask questions. You need to have the people there or the knowledge in yourself to be able to answer those questions. So it's still a team game as far as I'm concerned. And I've got enough experience in life to know that I always make sure that the people I need are there to be able to talk. Because the last thing you need to do is stop and say, I don't know, but I'll find out, which is okay. I don't know and I'll find out is okay. But if you've got someone you can go, I don't know, but he does, and he's going to tell you, or she's going to tell you, or they're going to tell you, that's always looks better than saying, I'll get back to you. So I think that, yeah, with the seniority, you're right, responsibility is something that comes with that. Unfortunately, the other thing that comes with the further up you move is you get less hands-on keyboard time. And I was an Uber geek when I arrived at Deloitte, but I know that I've had to make that transition because now I need to be more of the management side. But I do like to keep my hands on the keyboard as much as possible, which is still doable because I don't sleep.
And let me ask you this, and this will be of interest to folks that are on the other side. What steps would you take as a customer to make sure that the engagement is successful or minimize the impact of an incident? Because it's typically not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And there are certain steps you can take potentially, pre-incidents and then maybe post-incident. And also maybe talk to me about the kind of best practices to working with somebody like yourself and your team.
So when we, with our clients, with our CIO retainer clients, what we do is we hold quarterly meetings with them, and we build that relationship. And the relationship to me is the key part, because you know how to work with that client, and you know what their makeup is and how they work and what their practices are. So that's the first key, and the first thing that you get out of those quarterlies is that the face-to-face communication and putting a face to a name. The other thing is that you can then start to do things like workshops, tabletop exercises with them, start to look at what their playbook situation is and how they currently deal with any given situation. The thing about a plan is it never survives first contact with the enemy, right? So you can make as many plans as you want, but the thing is it may not work that way. But because you've got that relationship, you can work through it. But the amount of time,
Dale, it's like Tyson, basically said everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And it's very true. Plans are great, exercises are great, but very much different when it comes to the actual time. And when you say it's not if, it's when, and that's very true as well. But there are obviously things that people can do, but they don't do. And it's very simple stuff like MFA or backup solutions. And, until some, it's like a security budget. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen the memes, but the security budget before incident, and there's a guy there with $1, and then, a security budget after, and there's making it rain. And it's true. You've got to try and have that conversation with the C-suite to say, we understand why you don't want to spend money, but at the end of the day, do you want to be the next headline, that says you were breached and you didn't have even just the basics in place? And we don't want our clients to be in that position. So we spend time making sure that we use our time with them to get them into a better place. And even if it's a client that we haven't worked with before, we always go in with the mindset of we want them to come out the other side stronger, because you don't want it happening to them again. Because it's defense in depth, right? It's not about one particular policy that works. It's about having lots of policies in place, lots of structures in place, and lots of defensive mechanisms in place, because it's more difficult for the attacker to get through all of those different defenses, rather than just having to do a password brute force, which happens more often than you would probably care to imagine. But password brute force is by far still one of the easiest ways to get into an environment, and it shouldn't be, because it's not difficult to put a password policy in place, is it? Or have MFA in place.
That's right, and leads me to the next question. If you could think about it, and again, Dale, you're doing phenomenally well. Conversation is completely unscripted, so I'm just tackling you with question after question.
No worries.
If you could pinpoint like maybe 5, 3 or 5 lessons learned that from all the engagement you've had, post incidents, maybe some key takeaways of things you could have done right, or things that could have mitigated this whole incident. What would that be, like the top 3 or top 5?
Yeah, I think there's always certain ones, and MFA is definitely always top of the list. It's the one that could prevent most of what we deal with.
And Dale, it's almost trivial, right? Like, it's amazing.
It doesn't cost you anything, so just turn it on. But there's so much friction sometimes from clients. to say they don't want to, because I know back in the MOD days, it was all about user experience to the CIO who was in place at the time. And you know, he wanted to remove all sorts of really good security things we had in place, application whitelisting, what have you, because it slowed down the user experience, which I understand. And there's a balancing act to be done. But without security, you're just asking for trouble, right? So MFA can be switched on, and like in the Office 365 environment now, it's just so easy to do, and you can have it on an app on your phone, and it astounds me sometimes that people still have this issue with turning it on. But that's definitely the top learning point, I would say. Password policies is probably another one that just some organizations are very good at, others don't even consider it. And it's only when you say it to them that they, oh, yeah, okay, I see that. And, you know, when you're looking at an external facing router and the like, which has a very admin on it, and you think, yeah, that's probably not ideal.
Or it's just the name of your dog with like an exclamation point or something like that. Or
how did you know my password? That's not good.
Busted.
But yeah, the other one that I would say is quite big is just user education. I think that we need to work as security people. We need to work with the users, not blame the users, but work with them, educate them. You know, give them the information to say this is what to look out for. A lot of people, even people who are seasoned security professionals, can look at phishing emails these days and not know the difference until you take a bit of a deeper dive into it. Because some of these emails coming out these days are, you know, pretty professional looking, and you don't get the old, you know, looking through for spelling mistakes and stuff, because they're just not there. So unless you hover over the link or know that it's come from external, or these are the sort of things that I think help a great deal with security posture. In Deloitte, you know, we have regular phishing exercises, and I've been caught once because, you know, I was having a whatever day sort of day, and I wasn't even thinking. I clicked on the attachment, and then I get the warning up saying, you know, this was part of our internal thing, and I was pretty gutted. And that's the first time I've actually said it out loud, so I'm probably going to have a chat with my boss later. But no, it's true. You know, everyone has these days where they're maybe not switched on, but if you educate them, there's less chance of it happening. And then you put the technical restrictions in place as well, such as, you know, you've got link safe and attachment safe as part of Office 365. Turn them on. You know, turn on as many automatic things as possible, because as you know, SOC analysts and stuff in the past, you sat in front of these screens, you're looking at all the data go by, and you're thinking, you know what you're looking for. But a human can miss things. You know, a computer, you tell it what it's looking for, it's always going to see it. It's going to tell you about it. So I think that any organization that has these access to these sort of technical solutions, use them. You know, it's going to help you in the long run. But also remember to educate your workforce, and they'll help you, because we're very good at blaming users, I think, but not necessarily very good at helping them not to do it until it's happened, and then you give them all this education as a punishment. Shouldn't be a punishment.
And Dale, we're getting close to, we're getting a little bit over time here, but I have to ask you this as well. Speaking of education, you touched upon, protecting our kids online, and how, it used to be so clear, stranger danger. But now the stranger is not as clear, just like as phishing become more sophisticated, the online, predators are becoming more sophisticated as well. If I'm a parent and I'm a parent, what would be like the top, 5 things you can do to, teach your kids and help them be more secure online and just be, more aware of what's going on. So just so you mentioned, not get, be the next victim, or have your kids become the next victim.
So I have a YouTube channel, and the cyber safety guy, and one of the things that I talk about a great deal on there is the communication piece, and it's about having the ability to talk to your children, and have that trust in place. Because if you've got trust in place and something happens to them, or they, someone says something to them or contacts them, they're more likely to initially come and speak to you about it, right? So I think communication is always the first thing that I talk about with your kid, and have that trust in place. But then it's just about having an interest in what's going on, who they're chatting to, or what they're doing on their phones, and things like in the very early days when they're very young. Take the stuff away from them. Don't just give them carte blanche access to their phones and tablets and stuff. Don't let them take them upstairs. But as they get older, you're obviously going to have to relinquish trust. You're going to have to, admit that they are their own person, and you're going to have to trust in the fact that you've educated them enough to be able to trust them to know what looks bad. But if you don't talk to them about these things, if you don't tell them what the stranger danger is, if you don't tell them that the person on the other side of that chat may not be who they say they are, where are they going to learn this from? Because it's very sporadic what they get access to, like through school and stuff. So I always say that's the first thing, is to have the chats, have regular chats, and let them know that they can come and speak to you about things that without fear of punishment because they think they've done something wrong, because that's when they're going to start hiding things. And I think that in this day and age, kids are growing up in school and stuff way more technically advanced than we ever were, and they know how to hide things. If they want to hide something from you, they're going to. Things like on Instagram, you may be connected to them on Instagram, and you may think I can see what's going on, but they've got a spam account. They've got 2 or 3 spam accounts, because that's the accounts you're not a member of and don't see, and they're doing that because they feel they have to hide stuff. And that's where I think you can run into some big issues with kids then hiding stuff, and that's when they become targets and victims. So anytime a new app comes out, I tend to have a look and see what's going on with it and how that might affect people. But I just put the information out there to help people, because if you put the information out and they read it and digest it or ask questions, then there's more chance that they're going to speak to their child and help protect their child, which is the end goal at the end of the day. It's not the sexiest subject in the world, unfortunately, so it doesn't get a lot of traction. It's not like the latest pair of shoes, or who the biggest influencer is in the world of pop and stuff like that. But it's important to me, and I think to parents in general, because the end goal is to protect children, and that should be important.
Yeah, absolutely. Dale, thank you very much for this, spending time with this, it was a riveting conversation, really great. And thanks for providing a very authentic insight into your world and your journey. Much, much appreciated. What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you on any other topics that we discussed?
There's my YouTube channel, which is this cyber safety guy. I also have a Gmail address attached to that, which is mentalwarzone@gmail.com, or my LinkedIn, Dale McGleenon on LinkedIn.
Fantastic.
I don't deal with any of the other social media platforms because they're bad for you.
Thank everyone for joining today. Much, much appreciated. And as always, stay safe online as well as offline. And I'll see you at the next episode. Thanks very much, Dale, for joining.
Thanks very much.
So he was behind the door this entire time?
I just asked Colleen to bring him upstairs.
Hey, he's built like a pebble too.
Oh yeah, his father was a Hungarian champion, world champion basically, and he's a monster. He's knocked me over.
It's amazing. They have such great personalities, and every Frenchie, like I can't walk down the street and seeing a Frenchie without stopping and ask if I can pet. And they all have, different personalities, so they really are.
And then you also see that they have traits which are very similar as well. It's like we see other Frenchies all the time, and we're like, oh my God, it's just like him. But I mean, the thing about him is that he's not a therapy dog or anything officially, but he's my PTSD therapy dog, because I'll be having a really rubbish time, and he'll just notice, and he'll come into the room, he'll just put his paw on my arm or on my leg, and it just keeps me in the moment, and it's like Other times, he'll annoy the life out of me like now. And he'll want to lick my face and lick my arms and try and cool me down.
Definitely have uber sensitivity to emotions. I think that's and maybe it's the bat ears that maybe like can sense the way you breathe or kind of nuances in your behavior for sure.
Yeah, I think dogs in general just now.
Tell me, does it snore at night?
Oh yeah, he sleeps in the kitchen now. Although at the minute we're letting him sleep in my office at the minute because I put the aircon on for him in the evening. But he's a massive snorer. But you knew that already, didn't you?
Yeah, and the snoring, and then there's some other things that this breed does, especially after they eat. Sometimes we gotta really talk about it. Dale, it's been a real pleasure. I'm going to post it and then tag you on it. And this was